In the grim darkness of the far future, there's a lot of weirdos. From bald traders to green-skinned barbarians, the list is endless. However, there is one group that is peculiar even by 40K standards, and they call themselves the Adeptus Mechanicus. They're a band of toaster worshippers that probably spent their adolescent years lubing up their calculators with WD-40, while other kids in school were trying to figure out how to keep their Tamagotchi from dying. These are the same folks that eventually grew up to become butt buddies with the Emperor of Mankind, serving him with undying loyalty. There was also the fact that they thought he was their machine god and would gladly kiss his shiny metal ass, and probably do a lot more. They'd volunteer to rebuild themselves into a Hawk 2-op machine if Big E asked. But make no mistake, despite their quirks, or perhaps because of them, the Mechanicus is the backbone of the Imperium. Without them, there is no tech, no tanks, and no Titans massacring heretics. So, while they're busy swapping out their kidneys for pistons and praying to their blessed toaster, remember they might be weird, but they're the Emperor's weirdos. The origin of the Adeptus Mechanicus starts with Big E, humanity's ultimate mega-planner, realizing he'd need an endless supply of tech and war machines to commit his eventual space jihad across the galaxy. Enter the Void Dragon, a literal shard of an ancient alien god that had crash-landed on Earth, like a legendary Pokemon. This thing was part of the Catan, and basically the universe's version of a sentient, overclocked GPU. Big E, in his infinite wisdom, decided to 1v1 this thing, and he somehow won. But he couldn't kill it. The next best thing, apparently, was to drag the Void Dragon to Mars and lock it up. Fast forward a bit, and humanity starts colonizing the stars. Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and Jeff Bezos land on Mars. They establish a colony, and their technology evolves at an absurd rate, even compared to Terra. This was because they had a caged dragonite on the planet, leaking its red essence all over the place. It turned Mars into the hottest tech startup since NVIDIA. But no one on Mars knew about the existence of the Void Dragon. So instead, they invented a god called the Omnissiah and decided to worship that instead. They slapped some sacred decals on their Roombas and called it a religion, now known as the Cult of the Machine God. As time passes, humans all over the galaxy advance at an unprecedented pace. They reach peak technological advancement, with Men of Iron doing all the heavy lifting, ChatGPT cracking jokes, and Roombas waging silent wars against dust. Everything's great until the AI goes full Skynet on humanity and starts a rebellion. The war that followed was a brutal death match, costing humanity everything. Sure, humans won, but they got knocked back to the technological dark ages. Throw in warp storms and demon pop-ups from the malware you downloaded off LimeWire, humanity was getting wrecked from all positions. The planets that didn't get destroyed were dragged into civil wars, and Mars was no exception. It got so bad that it turned its own atmosphere into a nuclear barbecue. Eventually, the remaining Martians attributed their survival to the machine god. This ideology united their group, and they built temples to their new deity and dedicated their lives to the ultimate scavenger hunt, searching for the lost blueprints of humanity's greatest techs, the STCs. They were so devoted and zealous, they started upgrading their shitty flesh parts into mechanical replacements. Limbs, organs, anything was fair game. I'm sure if they were ever self-conscious about their wiener, they probably had a nice 12-inch pipe replacement for it too. Now, while the Martians were busy playing Lego with their bodies, Big E was trying to unify the entire galaxy. But despite being humanity's ultimate giga-genius and rocking a PhD in engineering from Harvard, the Emperor couldn't exactly 3D print the tools he needed for the Great Crusade. He needed fleets, tons of weapons, and, of course, a few planet-destroying titans. So where does one go shopping for that kind of firepower? The answer is obviously Mars, home of the toaster cults, and people who think WD-40 is holy water. When Big E finally arrived on Mars to strike up an alliance, the Mechanicus was already balls deep in their machine god fanboy era. They would make Taylor Swift fans look like amateurs. They didn't just worship technology, they'd make out with a hard drive if they thought it would bring them closer to enlightenment. So, naturally, when Big E rolled up and fixed the broken toaster with a casual finger tap, the tech priests collectively orgasmed and emptied their entire volume of oil from their metal balls. The Mechanicus would end up designating him as the Omnissiah. And thus, the deal was struck. Big E promised not to turn Mars into a giant exterminatus crater, and in return, the Mechanicus handed over their biggest toys, Titans, spaceships, and all the STC fragments they could dig up. Sure, not everyone on Mars was thrilled about this arrangement, but when your holy machine god literally shows up and fixes your appliances, it's hard to argue. Now, the ironic thing is the Emperor was pushing for atheism, while half the Mechanicus now literally worshipped him as a golden Gundam. It was a bit problematic if you look too deep into it, but both sides just chose to ignore it and went along their merry way. And so, the Great Crusade started. The Emperor of Mankind waged a glorious, galaxy-wide space jihad, turning unruly planets into obedient parking lots for his rule. And the Mechanicum gladly provided the firepower and logistics to do so. However, the Mechanicum rarely ever directly engaged in combat unless there was the faintest whisper of an STC nearby. Then, these grease-stained fanatics would leap out of their forge worlds like a junkie spotting free meth. For the uninitiated, STCs, or standard template constructs, are the Mechanicum's holy grail. They're essentially PDF blueprints of old technology that was used during the peak of humanity. But their obsession is borderline tragic. You see, they can't innovate. It's literally against their own rules. Discovering an STC is the only time they get to play with new toys without getting excommunicated. So, when they smell one, it's all-out war. They'd level entire civilizations, or even give their enemies the good old Hawk to a 9000, just for a chance to snag that sweet, sweet tech. Because nothing says holy mission like annihilating a planet to download a PDF. Anyway, the Great Crusade is going well, but eventually the Chaos Gods thought it'd be fun to fuck with the War Master, Horus Lupercal. They broke the fourth wall and revealed to him what Games Workshop had planned for their new lore expansions. They showed him Roboute Guilliman ruling the Imperium in the 41st millennium. This pisses Horus off. So, he hit Big E with the old reverse Uno and declared his own space jihad. Q primarchs murdering each other, space marines betraying their bros, and trillions of humans learning why OSHA regulations don't cover orbital bombardments. This was known as the Horus Heresy. Horus, being the overachiever he was, knew he needed more than just angry demigods to win. He needed the firepower of the Mechanicum. Horus offered a deal. He would provide truckloads of STCs and full autonomy for Mars if they fought for him instead. The offer split Mars like a bad group project. Loyalists wanted to stick with Big E, while the traitors went all in with Horus, forming the Dark Mechanicum. When Horus got killed at the Siege of Terra, the Dark Mechanicum suddenly realized their winning team was about to get dumpstered. Imperial forces and loyalist tech priests showed up with a no-refunds policy and purged the heretics. Those who survived fled to the Eye of Terror, where they've been plotting and crying ever since. Meanwhile, Mars got rebuilt, still worshipped its golden Gundam, and quietly pretended the whole Civil War thing was just a phase. Sure, they lost a lot of independence, but hey, at least they still have their precious PDFs. After the Horus Heresy, the Mechanicum went back to their regularly scheduled programming, hoarding rare STCs like Black Friday deals and churning out weapons for the Imperium. Think of them as Amazon Prime, but every package came with a 90% chance of radiation poisoning. That's because all their shit came from their forge worlds, which were sprawling hellscapes of factories and smog. These planets could produce anything from bolt rounds to Titans, all with the efficiency of a billion Jeff Bezos on caffeine overdoses. But this wasn't exactly great news for the workers. In true grimdark fashion, the Mechanicum took one look at labor laws and tossed them into a plasma furnace. Forge worlds became dystopian nightmares where slave labor wasn't just encouraged, it was mandatory. Workers weren't employees, they were labor units, aka people that the cult Mechanicus decided were too dumb for other roles. Sure, you could theoretically earn free time by hitting quotas, but let's be honest, most people failed and instead got punishment. Life on a forge world was basically a factory floor Hunger Games. You're born, slapped into a role as a cog in the literal machine, and told to get to work. If you're lucky and don't die of exhaustion, you might rise up the ranks and become a tech priest. But for most, it's a life of repetitive, back-breaking labor, passing down the same unchanging skills to the next generation. On the bright side, though, at least you'd never need to worry about job security. The assembly line will always need fresh meat. That concludes today's episode. Please remember to like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Feel free to leave a comment below on what faction I should cover next. Also, if you want to support the channel, please visit my shop in the link in the description for some Warhammer 40K LEGO figures.